Um, we've seen this tightening in the polls in a couple places that sort of made this election suddenly far more exciting than it was.
Yeah.
Um, do you see this sort of as that repeat of 2016, where there are voters that we're not catching, or what do you ascribe that to?
That is, I think, a very relevant question. And I have to say, I feel like I learned a lot by kind of going out in the field and talking to these voters in Wisconsin recently. I think a lot of, and this is sort of like a navel gazing commentary, but a lot of the reporting that's been happening has not involved a lot of talking to actual voters, because
Yeah.
it's hard to do that right now. And it's
Mhm.
putting, reporters are taking on a risk for that. I would say I was surprised to hear from these voters in Milwaukee about where they saw the election going in November. One main thing that really stuck out to me was I asked the group if they were excited about Biden, and they said no, which I was surprised about. Something else that I was surprised about with that group was I asked them if they thought that Biden and Harris needed to come to Wisconsin in person to campaign,
Mm.
even during the pandemic,
Yeah.
even knowing the circumstances. And I think almost all of the group, except for one person, said, yes, I think that that matters.
Yeah.
And there were a few people in the group who went so far as to say they thought that it was going to be a problem for the Biden Harris ticket if they did not come in person to some of those key swing states.
Yeah.
I say this because I think that Republicans and Democrats kind of play politics with different sets of rules. And
Mhm.
I think that President Trump has decided that he wants to do in-person events. The campaign has tried to scale back to make those events as safe as they can be, though you're still not supposed to be gathering in large numbers, and there's an absence of mask wearing at some of these events. But the Democrats won't do that. And I spoke with the Biden folks after this because I said, I want to give you guys a chance to respond to this.
Yeah.
Will the vice president and Harris ever go to Wisconsin before November? And their response was, we're not going to write it off.
Mhm.
But right now, our focus is on the health and safety of our staff, of our candidates, of our volunteers, and of voters. And they said, it's the limit right now is 50 people or less in Wisconsin are not supposed to gather together. And so they said, we're not, going to do that anytime soon.
Yeah.
So with that said, I think that, you know, I've seen some of the polls that you're talking about
Yeah.
that had a much narrower gap between the president and Biden. I don't know if that is necessarily reflective of the situation, but I do think that the voters that we talked to, they were optimistic that Biden could win. They were pessimistic about the ability of Biden to win the suburbs and to win the suburbs that they live in outside of Milwaukee, which in a lot of ways determined the election. The way that Wisconsin, ended up swinging determined the election. So I think that people should, if I was a Democrat, I would not be writing off any outreach, anything that I could be doing right now. And I don't think that reporters and people, observing what's going on should also write off the fact that President Trump could win again. I think that's entirely possible. He's an incumbent president. He's the largest, soapbox and podium in the world. So I think that we could see a repeat of 2016 where the polls look like they're going one way, and then, the Republicans have him out there and, talking directly with voters, and that could make a difference.
I mean, you've said so many things that I want to kind of pull out from there, but one of the things we know from, you said earlier, it's not a scientific study when you talk to voters, but we all know that anytime you've covered a presidential election, any election at all, there are those key nuggets that you pull out and you think, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. I'm going to hang on to that. And if it comes up again, I'm going to investigate this again and again, because it might be contrary to like the larger, conventional wisdom. And you just kind of hang on to it. And I think that's so interesting. The other thing I really find fascinating, and this is why we loved having such smart people like you on, is that reporters not being able to go out into the field could be that same thing where polling in 2016 didn't poll the right samples, or the myriad reasons that polling was kind of wonky in 2016 is that the likely voters that voted for Trump had never voted before in some cases. And so you have to, I'd be curious to see if news organizations are able to get them further out, because we've had reporters on, we have Paul Kane on, and he's like, I'd love to get to Iowa to see what's going on. But it's so key to be out there, because we had colleagues in 2016 who were at the rallies, and you were at these rallies, and there was incredible excitement. And yet people back in DC and New York didn't always get that. And so the polling wasn't showing it, and nothing was matching up. And, we saw a result that I would imagine a lot of people weren't expecting.